Welcome back to the Overlook. I'm your host, Dominique, and today I'm just going to briefly go over where we are at with Iran and the conflict between Israel and Iran and the United States' role in it. So, here on the podcast, I have talked a lot about the doomsdayers, such as Tucker Carlson, saying that we were entering World War III. He touted BRICS as a formidable alliance to counter the West and the strength of the United States. Tucker Carlson and many like him have also come out and said that the United States would unequivocally lose a war with Iran, which is laughable. I made an analogy about the United States capabilities. We have the largest, strongest, most advanced military in the world. We are the global hegemonic power, the global superpower. And Iran doesn't even have one of the top 5 militaries in the Arab world, let alone the world at large. And so, what Tucker Carlson and many on the isolationist or woke right, or even on the left, are essentially saying is that your local high school team is going to beat the Chiefs at the next Super Bowl, and that they're putting their money on the high school team. That is essentially the capabilities and the huge disparity between the United States and Iran that we're talking about. And yet, despite the reality of the US as the world hegemonic power, despite the decades of trying to negotiate and use diplomacy to curb the Iranian regime's ambitions for a nuclear weapon and its failures, despite all of that, many people are still claiming that the United States was the aggressor in this quote unquote conflict and that we are on the brink of World War III. So 2 days ago, the United States responded. They targeted 3 nuclear sites in Iran. And after that, a day or two later, President Trump came out and said that a ceasefire had been reached between the United States, Iran, and Israel. Now, this was not what the woke right or isolationists had been predicting. Of course, they had been predicting World War III. I had predicted that Iran would probably respond, and they responded in the exact way that I thought they would, which would be coordinating with Qatar. Now, the Iranian regime threatened that any U.S. military personnel in the Middle East were at risk. We do have a base in Qatar, but Qatar and Iran are essentially bed brothers. And so they coordinated a ceremonial response with 14 missiles, 13 of which were downed, and the 14 was allowed to fall, but it didn't hit anybody. And no casualties were reported from Iran's response. Now, in Iranian media, it was celebrated as a huge success. The state-run media essentially said that they had delivered a devastating blow to the United States military base in Qatar, all of which was a lie and propaganda to help save the regime's face. Of course, they have a state-run media, but the truth within Iran is also well known because of social media and the large resistance movement internally to the Iranian regime. Okay, so that brings us to yesterday, last night, when President Trump said that there was a ceasefire that had been reached. Since then, the ceasefire has been violated. Israel responded to Iran. They claimed that the Iranian regime had violated the ceasefire. President Trump just came out today and essentially said that both sides don't know what the F they are doing. And he used the real curse word, which is not customary to see a sitting president use the F-bomb when addressing the media. You could tell in President Trump's response that he was quite frustrated. And I think what President Trump has said, though, highlights the lack of understanding for how this conflict in the region is playing out. So when he announced the ceasefire, Trump said they've gotten it all out of their system and there will hopefully be no further hate. Trump said this in an earlier post. I want to thank Iran for giving us early notice. He's talking about the response and missiling our base in Qatar. So essentially it was coordinated. They targeted our military base in Qatar, but told the United States that they were doing it so that we could shoot it down. And then President Trump went on to say, perhaps Iran can now proceed to peace and harmony in the region, and I will enthusiastically encourage Israel to do the same. This is what the West fundamentally fails to understand about Iran and the region and conflicts in the region. First off, these are ethno-religious conflicts, and they also go back decades and decades and decades, and even thousands of years. It shapes and frames the ethos and the worldview and the mindset of the regime in Iran and of the Israeli government. And if you think that Iran, even though crippled by the United States response a few days ago, is now willing to lay down their arms and to no longer pursue their ideological and eschatological mission to export the revolution and globalize the Intifada, then you're wrong. And that's where I think President Trump's assessment of what peace in the Middle East looks like falls short. Now, also, engaging diplomatically with the Iranian regime to reach a ceasefire agreement also legitimizes the regime. Now, the Trump administration has been very careful to not call for regime change, but this is the reality. Until the regime does change, there will never be change. There will never be peace in the Middle East. Yes, the mullahs, the regime, have been dealt a huge blow, one in which they might not ever recover from, but they are still maintaining their power in Iran, and diplomatically engaging with the regime only further legitimizes them and closes that window for regime change in Iran. And so, in conclusion, I just wanted to briefly summarize, where we're at. I'm going to do a more in-depth analysis and reference videos in an episode tomorrow, but so much has happened in a few days. I just wanted to quickly document what this all means. There will not be peace. A ceasefire will not be instated unless the Iranian regime can adhere to it. If they antagonize Israel, if they provoke Israel, Israel will respond. We have seen this with Hamas violating every ceasefire since the start of the war on October 7th and the ceasefires that existed before October 7th. Hezbollah has done the same. The Iranian regime is a zero-sum death cult ideology, and the regime is interested above all else in their own survival. And so while President Trump's statement or desire for peace is one that I think everyone mutually shares, they didn't just get it out of their system. This isn't, a blitz that the Iranian regime has gone on. This has been their plan for decades and decades and decades. And the regime hasn't had the capabilities to use a nuclear weapon to strong arm the region to their ideological will, but they have wreaked havoc and chaos across the region for decades. Again, ask Saudi Arabia, ask Iraq. This is not just a conflict between Israel and the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime is a destabilizer for the entire region. The Arab world loathes the regime. They look at the regime as a security threat and an ideological threat to their own governments. And so the ceasefire is not the end of it. Those who thought that, all right, the conflict's over, we're good to go. This isn't, again, getting it out of their system. This is a decades-long ideological and cosmic war. And so I'm sure that there is going to be escalations to come. Does that mean that we're going to, be on the brink of World War III? No. China, as evident by COVID, is a paper tiger. So is Russia. They've been unable to win a war with Ukraine for the last 3 years, I believe it has been, or longer. Ukraine, which had far, far diminished capabilities to Russia, or what we have been led to believe Russia was capable of. And the Iranian regime, even before the United States response a few days ago, direct response, had been struggling with the conflict between Israel and its proxies across the region. And so these regimes are weakened. They are paper tigers. We're not embarking on war. BRICS, like Tucker Carlson keeps throwing out, is not a military pact. It is a conceptualized economic infrastructure that has not been fully realized. It's an idea. It's not an alliance that is going to bring us into World War III. And anyone who is an apologist for the Iranian regime is a traitor to America First policy. And as Patrick Bet-David posted on X, which I was glad to see him speak out about this, anyone who is an apologist for the regime, meaning Tucker Carlson or Dave Smith or Candace Owens or Daryl Cooper or even Russell Brand, those who are advocating for an anti-West response in this long ideological battle. Again, this goes back to even the revolution and the fight between Western values and Islamism in Iran in the late 1970s, is being either paid by a very strong and wealthy Qatar lobby, or perhaps is ideologically or maybe even spiritually possessed by anti-Semitism, which is also at the core of the woke right and isolationist movement here in America. Okay, that's just a brief summary. I just wanted to hop on and really quickly do that. I will see you in a deeper dive later this week. As I've said in some of my last episodes, be awake, not woke. Don't fall for the woke right lies. And I will see you in the next episode.